Good evening, everyone. This is Indrup, and today I'm going to take a class on graphs basics. So, this is a class for someone who has very little idea about how to attempt graphs, or someone who's just starting ALTS. But it can also help people who have been writing graphs and who get confused in writing what to do. So, I'll keep it a very short class, and I try to cover everything from the introduction to the body paragraphs, and I hope it clears all your doubts and helps you write a good graph. Okay, so first I'll answer some basic questions. The first one is that the weightage of the graph is one third. Basically, out of the 9 bands, 6 bands are reserved for the essay, and 3 bands are for the graph, which is the task one. And so, out of the 1 hour, I would say you should not allot more than 25 minutes to the graph and the remaining 35 to 40 minutes to the essay because the weightage demands so. So, giving more time to the task one is not recommended. Second thing, some students ignore task one. They think that the weightage of task two is more. So, I would say that is a very faulty strategy. Um, for me, the reason being although the weightage of the essay is more, the essay is kind of not in our hands, like not in the student's hands because of the idea. So you may get a very difficult topic and you might not be able to brainstorm the ideas at that moment. So I would say graph is much more easier to prepare, and it gives you kind of a guarantee what to write, what, like, you don't have to, you can prepare for the graph in a much better way than you can prepare. And I even think that it's easier to score 9 out of 9, basically 3 out of 3 in the graph rather than as compared to scoring 6 out of 6 in the essay, because the line formation also you can get an idea about. Okay. So I've addressed this. So let's move forward. There are two types of graphs that I make two categories. So one is the data graphs. These are the graphs which have data. So I have 5 graphs in this category: the bar, table, pie, line, and combination. Combination is nothing but a combination of the two of the above graphs. And then we have non-data graphs. The first one is maps and second is process. In these graphs, we don't have any data. They're attempted differently. Today, I'll be mainly covering the data graphs. One of the data graphs, the bar. It'll give you an idea on how to write every type of graph, but I'll be covering a bar in today's class. So let's move on. Okay, I've taken this question as a sample. It's available in our book, which covers more than 300 essays. And if someone wants a practice book for essays for graphs, I don't think there's any other book this is which covers as many topics as the book. So you can check it out on our website, markeriles.com. Okay, so this is the graph, bar graph. We have, if you look at it, what does it say? The chart below shows the aid from 6 developed countries to developing countries from 2008 to 2010. So you can see this graph is showing the aid in billions of dollars. And these countries, US, Germany, UK, Japan, Netherlands, and developed Sweden, they're giving the aid in 3 years. The first bar is 2008, the middle, the black bar is 2009, and the last bar is 2010. So 2000, the first bar represents the aid given by that country in 2008, the second bar 2009, and so on. Okay, so how do I attempt to graph? My pattern or my structure of the graph is, first I write the introduction. Here I have just two suggestions from you. Pick up information from the question and the diagram and write what the graph shows. You don't have to go into any detail. You don't have to mention any features. You just have to tell what the graph represents to give the examiner an idea. Um, the second is the overall. Overall is basically, or the overview. Overview is a body paragraph which covers the main features, but it doesn't mention the data. So it's the main features without covering the data. And the third part is the body paragraphs. Here we are going to give the features again, but we are going to elaborate or support them with the data. So these are the 3 parts to my essay. Normally I write 2 to 3 body paragraphs, 1 paragraph for the overview, 1 paragraph for the introduction. Okay. So moving forward, I've written the introduction here. I write a very simple introduction, and I've repeated this again, times and again, time and again in my classes. If you've attended them or if you've watched the videos, but I'll repeat it here. See, I teach in my classes, and I see that a lot of students spend a lot of time writing the introduction, and it doesn't carry a lot of weightage because, in a way, you're just writing what the question is saying again. So my recommendation is not to spend a lot of time here. If you can paraphrase, if you're good at paraphrasing, meaning writing in your own words, like changing what's written in the introduction, do it. If you're not good at it, it doesn't even matter. I have had students score 7.5 bands just copy pasting the introduction. Actually, it happened like that. The student messed up with the essay and he had just 10 minutes left for the graph. So he just did copy paste. He took the CDL's exam and he copied the question and wrote it. And so I'm just telling you, paraphrasing is overrated. If you do paraphrase, it helps, but it doesn't help so much that you spend so much time on the introduction. So my suggestion is to give it not more than 1 to 2 minutes. After writing the introduction, you're going to write the overview. So I've written the introduction here. The only thing that I've taken from the question or the diagram is one thing. If you read here, the question says the chart below shows. So there's one information I've taken from the diagram. It's such a critical information. The information is the name of the graph, the type of the graph. It's a bar graph. That's what I've written here. The bar graph illustrates the aid given by 6 countries to developing countries in this year, and this year. Okay, let's move on into the overview. Here I focus on writing 2 features, and these features are based on comparisons. Why do I base them on comparisons? Because that's what the question is asking. If you look at the second question, the part of the question, the second sentence in the question, what does it say? Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So the question itself is asking us to make comparisons and report the main features. So that is why I'm going to write 2 main features which are based on comparisons. And second thing that I want you to gain from this sentence is even if you skip some data, it's not going to be a big problem because the question itself is not asking you to write everything. The question is asking you to summarize and select and report the main features. In fact, there are bands for selecting and reporting the main features. If you write everything, it will score you less bands than writing only the main features. So let's focus on writing the main features and not everything. And what is important, what is not important, we'll discuss further. Okay. So here 2 comparisons are possible. If you look at the diagram, there are 2 comparisons possible. See, this is the aid given. Aid is given by 6 countries. So we can compare the countries, the aid given by the 6 countries, and we can also compare the years. We can see how the aid changed over time. So, for example, if you look for US, in the first year, the aid given was 20. What happened in 2009? It fell. Then what happened? It increased. So basically, it fluctuated. And you can see the same thing for how it changed over the period of time. You can see it for every country. Let's look at Germany. First year 10, then around 14, then 15. So it's an increase. In the UK's case, you can see again there's a fluctuation, decrease and then increase. Same with Japan, decrease then increase. Same with Netherlands. First it's an increase, but then a decrease. And exactly the same as Netherlands in the case of Sweden. So fluctuated in all these cases and increased in one case. So one comparison you can write how it changed over time. In this case, fluctuating, increased, fluctuating, 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 fluctuating. One suggestion I have here, not a suggestion, but something that you must be mindful of. Sometimes students don't read or pay attention to the graph. Like I showed this to my students and they started looking like they started going from left to right. That's not the way to, like, check out increase and decrease. Increase and decrease is happening over years. So if I go from US to Germany, I'm not telling about what is happening over the years. I have to go from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. That's my trend change. So be careful when you attempt this. look at the question properly, look at the diagram properly, and go from year one to year two to year three. Don't try to change countries when you're making these trends. Do them individually. Like first, I found out the trend for US. It's a fluctuating trend. Then I moved on to the Germany. I cannot go like look at US data and look at Germany and say Germany decreased. Germany neither decreased. Germany neither like it didn't decrease. Actually, it increased. It's less than US, but it's not decreasing. Okay. So I've written this feature. Aid given by all the six countries fluctuated over time except Germany. If you can look at it, I've written the same thing that I've mentioned here. Fluctuated, increased, fluctuated, 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 fluctuated. Germany's increased. So I've written the same thing. Aid given by all the six countries fluctuated over time except Germany. Now let's come to the second part. What you can do is you can compare the countries. Here also, students make a mistake. What's the mistake they make? They start comparing the years as well. Don't compare the years. Don't look at the years. Just compare the countries. What I mean is pick one year, look at the data for all countries and make your decision. For example, imagine the red line. The red line for me is representing the data for 2008. Where is it the highest? It's the highest in US. For all the other countries, if you look at it, the red line is below the US point. For US, it's around 22. If you look at Germany, below 22, below that point, below that point, below that point, below that point. Similarly, the green line is also the highest at which point the US. And 2010 also, it's the highest in the US. So I'll write what US gave the maximum aid in all the 3 years. For red line, meaning the 2008 line, it was the highest, green highest, the blue highest. I think the lines are making it a bit confusing, but even if you look at without looking at the lines here, it's clear. Like 2008, you can look here, it's the highest point. All the countries are below the US. Second year 2009 also, all the countries are below the US. The US is at around 20, all the countries are below 20. And the third case, of course, again the same thing. So the feature we end up writing is the US gave the maximum aid in all the 3 years. Here I wrote another sentence because one of my students asked me a doubt here. Here I've written, in addition, the US gave the maximum aid in all the 3 years. So while I was teaching the class, one of my students asked me what would happen if in 2009 some other country gave the maximum aid and in the third year some other country. I said, I'll write the complete thing. So I'll show you here. The US gave the maximum aid in 2008, while in 2009 Germany gave the maximum aid, and in 2010 Japan gave the maximum aid. Now, a lot of you will read this line and will say, a lot of repetition. Don't worry about the repetition. Think of the feature properly. I take 3 mock tests. There are 3 different toppers in all the 3 mock tests. First mock test A is the topper. Second mock test B is the topper. Third mock test C is the topper. Isn't it my duty? Wouldn't it be wrong to just mention one mock test and mention the topper? I have to mention the topper for all the 3 tests. I cannot combine it, right? So I have to do that here. I have 3 sections. I have to mention the topper of all 3 sections. I cannot do it like that. So do that. Don't worry about the repetition in words. I've done this beforehand also. I have told you repetition doesn't help you. It doesn't harm you. It might not help you, but it doesn't harm you as badly as we think. In fact, I'll tell you, what do my students do sometimes to avoid repetition? They write some wrong word. For example, one of my students, just because he didn't want to write the word, wrote loan. A loan and an aid are a completely different thing. Why would you want to write loan? Just for paraphrasing, you're not gaining bands, you're losing bands. So trying to avoid paraphrasing hurts students much more than it helps. Then it doesn't, it doesn't harm you as much. Okay. So I would just say, don't worry about repetition. Even if you have to repeat the maximum word, aid word 3 times, do it. If you have other synonyms, of course, I'm not telling you not to use them, but make sure they're the right synonyms. Okay. For example, I'll be honest, I can't think of a synonym for the word aid. Neither do I want to use it. Why would I want to use it? I'll use the word aid. Does not make any difference to me. But probably for the maximum word, I can use the word highest. And then I can probably make one of the sentences in a passive way. Like I could have said the maximum aid was given by Germany instead of writing Germany gave the maximum aid. But my point here is not to tell you the sentence variations. My point here is to tell you what to write. So this would be my second feature. The first feature is a comparison of what happened over a period of time. And we said the aid given by all the countries fluctuated except Germany. The second is a comparison between countries. I'm comparing which country gave the maximum aid out of the six countries. And I'm doing that for each year. First, I do that for 2008, then I do that for 2009, and then I do that for 2010. In all the cases, US gave the maximum aid. And that's what I've written here. Okay. Next, we come to body paragraphs. So like I told you, what are body paragraphs? Here also we give features, but our features are supported by data. It's not just data. That's where the students make a mistake. See, the graph is not asking us to write the data. The question is asking us to write features. But here we are going to support the features with data. Okay. My only suggestion here is to plan and write. Plan and write would be meaning, what I mean by that is like students to do what? They start writing and then they think what to do next. So for me, it's never like this. For me, before I start writing my body paragraphs, I plan what I'm going to write in the first paragraph and what I'm going to write in the second paragraph. So let me show that to you, what I mean by that. So I formulated two approaches here. So I'll tell you both what I thought, what I would do. So I thought the first approach that I thought of was I'll first talk about what happened from 2008 to 2009 in the first body paragraph. And in the second body paragraph, I'll talk of what happened from 2009 to 2010. So, for example, I'll mention what happened from 2008 to 2009. Forget 2010. 2010 is not even there. Let's just cross it out like this. Don't look at this. You ignore it completely. Okay. And we are only looking at what happened from 2008 to 2009. We are ignoring the third year. It doesn't even relate because our first paragraph is not about 2010 at all. Okay. So in case of US, we can see a decrease. Then we can see a case of increase in case of Germany. In the UK also, we can see a decrease. In case of the Japan, we can see a decrease again. In case of Japan, in case of Netherlands, there's an increase. And in case of Sweden, of course, there's also an increase. So Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden saw an increase, while US, UK, and Japan cut down their funding and from 2008 to 2009. Exactly what I'm going to write in the first body paragraph. Okay. And I'll give the data to support it. That doesn't like I'll mention this. This is what my main features are. In case of US, UK, and Japan, the funding decreased, while Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden increased their funding. And I'll mention the data too to support it, to show that it happened. So $22 billion to $20 billion. So like around 12 to 11, around 12 to 10. I'll mention that. Okay. Then the second paragraph would be exactly the opposite, 2009 to 2010. Here I'll not look at which year, 2008. I'll stop looking at it and I'll do the same thing again. Like, um, if you're clear what I'm trying to say, I'll look at what happened from 2009 to 2010. Here it's an increase, again an increase, again an increase, again an increase. 2008, 9 to 10. I'm not looking at 2008. Stop looking at it. Okay. And in these two cases, there's a decrease, 2009 to 2010, 2009 to 2010. So in the second paragraph, I'll mention that there was an increase in these four countries while there was a decrease in these two countries. That's what I will do. Okay. So I'll just give the data to support it as well. Okay. For me, the data for the first year and last year are kind of the main features. So I want to know where someone started and where someone ended. The middle year is not a main feature, so I don't end up writing the middle year data in many of the graphs. I'll avoid it. Even like for example, here I'll just give it decrease by $2 billion. I'll not give it reach 20, but I do give the data for the final year and the first year. Okay, so that was one of my approaches. Another approach that I thought of while I was doing the graph was why not consider them country wise and look at the trends a bit differently. For example, if I consider this to be an increase, I'm not considering the middle year. I'm thinking the first year is 22 and the last year is around 24. So there's an increase. So I'll mention that. In this case also, there's an increase. The first year is 10 and the last year is 15. So I'll also consider it an increase. So these two countries, I'll consider it to be increasing. Let's see what do we consider for the third country. The third country, the problem is the first year data and the last year data, they're not that different. They're kind of at the same level. It's slightly more than the first year data. So I'll keep it to be a fluctuating thing. Here also, the last year data and the first year data are not so different. So I'll keep it fluctuating. I'm not keeping it stable. For stable, it should have been the same in all the 3 years. I'm calling it fluctuating. Here also, I can see the first year and last year, it's quite close to each other. So I'll call it fluctuating again. And the last one also, I'll call it fluctuating. So I could have mentioned the first paragraph could be these two countries where I say the funding increased, whereas the second body paragraph could be for these four countries where I can say the funding fluctuated. So that's an approach. I know what to do. Now I'll mention US first, then I'll mention Germany. I'll end the first BP, and then I'll talk about these four countries, and I'll say the funding by them fluctuated. My point is like you have an approach beforehand. You don't think of approaches like on the go. You think of it beforehand, you plan and then write. But here I've discussed another approach. When I was doing this, right, this approach that I just mentioned, this was mentioned to me by a student and I really liked it. And I thought I'll discuss it with you. But the approach that I thought of was, I thought there was a similarity between US, UK, and Japan. And the similarity is that the funding by them first decreased and then increased. If you can look here, funding first decreased, then increased. Funding first decreased, then increased. While in the case of Netherlands and Sweden, it's the opposite. The funding first increased and then decreased. First increased from 2008 to 2009 and then decreased. And in case of Germany, of course, it continuously increased. There was never a fall. So what would I do in the first paragraph? I'll mention the US, the UK, and Japan in the first body paragraph and mention the funding between 2008 and 2009 decreased, but the funding for all the three countries between 2009 and 2010 increased. Then I'll mention Netherlands in the second body paragraph. I'll first mention Netherlands and Sweden, and I'll write by contrast in these cases, the funding increased between 2008 and 2009, but then decreased. And finally, and mention Germany that the funding increased continuously from 10 to this much. So that's what I plan to do. First BP, first decrease and increase, these three countries, then Netherlands and Sweden, and finally Germany. That's my third approach, or the approach that I thought of, my second approach. So basically, I think of my approach before attempting. I do not start attempting, I don't, students, they do what they start, they make up a sentence. Like I'll tell you, I told my students to start writing and they did what? Okay, UK and Japan both gave this much dollars of aid. I said, very good sentence, 12. I said, next line. Then my student started thinking. One student say, okay, I'll talk about US next. I said, why? He said, just I want to because it's the highest. I said, okay. And I talked to the second student. He said, no, I'll talk about Germany. I said, why? He said, because Germany is closest to the UK and Japan. Now, why did this problem occur? Because they did not plan it beforehand. Like they just went it, like they think about individual sentences. I'll start with you and UK and Japan, then I'll do that. Don't think of individual, think of the overall trends. Make your body paragraph according to features, not according to data. This is the worst approach to make a body paragraph, that two countries have the same data. Okay, they have the same data, but then what? How are they similar? For example, let's imagine UK and Japan both were 12 in the first year. But in the second year, UK became 40, UK gave 14, and Japan gave 10. Now, I believe they are more different than they're alike. Okay, they both gave 12 in the first year, but then the funding by UK increased and the funding by Japan decreased. Isn't that more stronger to put them opposite each other? They're not similar. They're more different in the way that the funding that UK gave is increasing, while the funding that Japan gave decreased. So they're completely different to each other. 12 and 12 having the same thing is not such a strong thing in my opinion. So just plan and write. That's my idea. If you do that, you'll end up writing a good essay or a good graph. Okay, so here I've written the two approaches. and you can go over them if you want. Okay. So I would, in the first approach, I would cover trends from year one to year two. And second year, I would cover year two to year three. Then I've talked about where aid first fell and then increased. Those countries, the US, UK, and Japan. First it decreased, then it increased. And in the second case, I would talk about first increase and then decrease, which include Netherlands and Sweden. And finally, I would cover countries. The third country, Germany, where it increased and continuously. Okay, moving forward. I've written the body paragraphs here. So I started with the US. The US gave $22 billion of aid in 2008. And then I've written this sentence, please ignore here. I've given the data for all the countries in the first year. So the US was followed by UK and Japan, which gave around $12 billion. Then Germany gave $2 billion less than the UK and Japan. And the least aid was given by the Netherlands and Sweden at $8 billion. So basically, first I did what? I gave the data for all the countries in 2008. It's not very hard, it's very simple. So I started with the US 22. It was followed by the UK and Japan, which gave $12 billion. Then Germany gave $2 billion less than them. And finally, the least aid was given by these two countries. That's what I've written here for the first year. And then I've written what happened: decrease, decrease, decrease. By contrast, increase, increase, increase. So that's what I'm going to do here. Over the next year, the aid given by the US and Japan fell by around $2 billion, and the aid given by the UK went down by approximately $1 billion. By contrast, the aid given by Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden increased by roughly $4 billion, $2 billion, and $1 billion, respectively, over the same period. So I've talked about it over the next year, what happened in the case of US and Japan, and then the UK. And then I've said what happened in the other three countries. So I'm done with the first paragraph. I've mentioned what happened from 2008 to 2009. I've given the data for 2008, and I've mentioned the trends till 2009. Now, in the second BP, I'm mentioning what happened from 2009 to 2010. The aid given by all the countries increased, barring the Netherlands and Sweden. Barring means except, which cut down the aid by $1 billion each. So I've written the aid given by all the countries increased, except these two, which cut down by their aid by $1 billion each. In 2010, the US gave approximately this much. Germany, the UK, and Japan gave about 15, 13, and 11. And finally, the Netherlands and Sweden gave only around $8 billion and $7 billion respectively in 2010. So I've given the data for every country, and I ended my graph here with the data of 2010. So that's how I would that's my first approach. I've written the whole graph here with the introduction, the body overall, and the body paragraphs. Okay. Here, if you look at this sentence, if you ask what I've done here is, one of my students asked, why have you given the data for all countries in 2008 first, and then mention what happened from 2008 to 2009? And I told him, it's not necessary to do so. You can give the data for one country and then tell what happened till 2009. Then you can come to the next country and tell what happened from 2008 to 2008 and then till 2009. Similarly, could have done that the same thing for Japan. So it's not compulsory to do that. It's just what I thought I felt like doing at the time. I felt like giving the data for every country in 2008, the data for every country, and then mentioning what happened from 2008 to 2009. Now, some of you might ask like I told you not to give the data. Data is not so important. But I also said data for the first year is really important, and I want to give the data for the first year. I always want to give the data for the first year because I think it's a really important year. You want to tell the examiner where you started. And similar is the case with last year also. I want to tell the examiner where I ended. Now, here I've written the second approach. Here, what I do, I mention US decreased and then increased. Similar with UK, decreased and then increased, and similar Japan first. First three countries in the first BP, then Netherlands and Sweden. First increased and then decreased, first increased and then decreased, and finally Germany, which continuously increased. So in detail, the US gave roughly this much of aid in 2008, which fell to $20 billion in 2009 before increasing to 24 billion in 2010. I am done with the US. I've mentioned started here, fell to this much before increasing. Then I've written similarly, the aid given by the UK and Japan also fell between 2008 and 2009 from $12 billion each to about $11 billion and $10 billion respectively. However, like the US, from this year to this year, in the next year, the aid given by them increased to 13 and $11 billion respectively. So I've given the data like this and ended it here. So my three countries are done. On the other hand, the aid given by Netherlands and Sweden increased between this year and this year, but then fell from this year to this year. So I've mentioned how are they different. In the first case, the aid was first decreasing and then increasing. Here, the first aid first increased and then decreased. In case of Netherlands, the figure stood at this much, and this much in these 3 years, while for Sweden, the figures were this much, and this much respectively. So I've given the data for them, both of them. And I don't need to mention increase and decrease here because I've given that part earlier. First increase and then decrease. Finally, Germany was the only country which its aid continuously from $10 billion in 2008 to $15 billion in 2010. And I've ended with Germany here. So that was my second approach. And here is the whole graph. So that's the way I attempted this graph, and I hope it gives you a very good idea about how to write it. And if you have any questions, you can write it in the comments. And if there are any doubts or anything else you want me to cover, I can cover that too. So that's it. I plan to make a class on the non-data graphs in the coming days, and so I'll do it. But for them, the maps would have a different class and the process would have a different class. Anyways, I hope this video helps you. Thank you for listening.